participants read the case materials, recorded their opinion, or hunch, concerning the appropriate verdict, and discussed the issue with a confederate who took a position opposite to the participants. The findings supported our notion that the crystallization of beliefs determines whether need for closure would affect the seizing on early cues, or the freezing on pre-existing opinions. Where the materials given our participants lacked the legal analysis, and hence a basis for a crystallized opinion, they tended to be more persuadable under noise versus no noise. That is, they tended to shift more from their pre-discussion verdicts toward their partner's views, and took less time to argue the issue with her or him. To the contrary, where the participants' materials included the legal analysis, affording the formation of a fairly secure opinion, they were less persuadable or more resistant to persuasion under noise, were thus no noise. The second study conceptually replicated the first with one major variation. Rather than using noise as a situational induction of the need for closure, we assessed this need via our individual difference measure. Webster and Kruglansky, 1994. The findings again yielded the predicted interaction. In the presence of the legal opinion, high versus low, need for closure, participants argued with the confederate more and tended to be less persuaded by this individual, whereas in the absence of such opinion, they argued less and were more persuaded. Vermeer, Van Kenhove, and Hendrick, 2002, used consumer's choice behavior to investigate the amount of information sought prior and subsequent to a crystallization point. These investigators used a simulated store environment and had their participants repeatedly choose a brand within one of two low-involvement product categories, detergents and margarines. The crystallization point was operationally defined as the moment following which the participant began to use the same decision rule, e.g., on the basis of price, consistently until the last choice was made. It was found, first, that fewer low versus high need for closure participants ever reached the crystallization point. Furthermore, whereas the high need for closure individuals sought more product-relevant information before versus after the crystallization point, no such difference emerged for low need for closure participants. These findings demonstrate that the road leading from need for closure to close-mindedness isn't a straightforward one. In the absence of pre-existing opinions, persons under a high need for closure may be quite open-minded and eager to gather information and to be influenced by novel suggestions. It follows that high need for closure persons might be obedient followers in some respect. They may quickly accept a leader's commandments if these pertain to new matters or at least do not clash with their pre-existing views. But high need for closure individuals can also be particularly obstinate and refractory to arguments if these are at variance with their pre-existing views. We shall revisit these possibilities at a later juncture. The need to avoid non-specific closure. It is of interest to consider what the experience might be like at the other end of the non-specific closure continuum denoting a high need to avoid closure. It seems plausible that persons in such a motivational state should be inclined to deeply process or seize upon any new information if prior evidence threatened the formation of a definite closure. Inasmuch as closure is anathema to such persons, they should welcome any relevant information implying the need to rethink, and hence reopen, their judgmental commitments. On the other hand, if prior information was internally inconsistent, ambiguous, or vague and hence impeded the formation of closure, persons with a high need to avoid non-specific closure should be relatively unmotivated to consider further information that might alter their comfortable current state of epistemic non-commitment. In a sense then, persons with a high need to avoid non-specific closure may be said to freeze upon their non-commitment where current information justified it, select environments where ambiguity might reign in permanence, and seize with urgency upon new relevant information if prior evidence did begin to point to a definite opinion. In other words, whereas persons with a high need for non-specific closure should be open-minded in the absence of a prior opinion and closed-minded in its presence, persons with a high need to avoid non-specific closure should be closed-minded in the absence of an opinion and open-minded in its presence, or, preemptively, in its threatened presence. Specific closure needs. What might the consequences be for the knowledge formation process of a need to have or to avoid a specific closure? Ample evidence from the domain of motivated reasoning for this case. Science C.E.G. Dunning, 1999, Kruglansky, 1999, Kunder, 1990, Kunder and Sinclair, 1999, as well as from cognitive dissonance research, Aronson. 1992, Cooper and Fazio, 1984, Harman Jones and Mills, 1999, Steele, 1988. Suggest that specific closure needs introduce bias toward conclusions congruent with such needs. That means that individuals with a specific closure needs would tend to freeze on their prior knowledge if such knowledge was congruent with their needs and, to the contrary, would be quick to unfreeze their judgments if those were incongruent with their needs. Several different processes might mediate such effects. Thus, Ditto and Lopez, 1992, obtained evidence that individuals may curtail the processing of information if the information supported their preferred judgments, and to prolong information processing if the initial information was contrary to their preferred judgments. It is also possible that ambiguous information is construed in a way that reinforces the desired conclusions. Kunder, 1990. Research by Sinclair and Kunder, 1996, also suggests that specific closure needs may activate from memory information likely to support individuals' preferred judgments and, to the contrary, inhibit available knowledge structures inconsistent with such judgments. In some of their studies, for example, the investigators induced in participants the motivation to disparage or to think highly of an individual by suggesting to them that this person thought of them well or poorly. To accomplish this, participants completed a fictitious test allegedly assessing their leadership ability. Then they were shown a video recording of either a positive or a negative evaluation of their performance given by someone characterized as a manager in training. This person was either a mainstream individual, a white man, or a member of a potentially negatively stereotyped group. In one experiment this was a white woman, whereas in another study it was a black man. The main dependent variable in these studies was the evaluation by participants of the managers in training performance. The investigators reasoned that the stereotypes of women as well as of black people contained negative elements in the domain of performance. Female managers are sometimes stereotyped as less interpersonally competent and less meritorious at work than are male managers. Heilman, Block and Martel, 1995. Black persons, too, are often stereotyped as less intelligent than whites, and black managers are considered less competent than their white counterparts. Landau, 1995. If directional motivation to negatively evaluate someone who had thought ill of oneself induces the tendency to recruit from memory cognitions supportive of such derogation, the woman and the black assessor should be evaluated less positively than the white assessor because of the availability in memory of negative stereotypes of women and blacks that could be activated by the motivation. That is exactly what happened. The woman and the black assessor, but not the white assessor, were disparaged after providing negative feedback but not after providing positive feedback. Subsequent studies found no such tendencies among detached observers, lacking the participants' directional motivation, who were exposed to the same videotape of the evaluation that the actual participants received. These results provide compelling evidence for the activation of cognitions consistent with one's directional motivations. A note on reality constraints. Do motivational effects on human judgment, of both the non-specific and specific varieties, know any limits? Or can one conclude what one will regardless of circumstances? A quick reflection seems to deny that the latter is the case. After all, we often enough receive bad news that we accept as such, and we all too frequently form specific closures whose contents are opposite of desirable. Thus, we typically accept professors' decisions failing us on exams, editors' actions rejecting our articles, or study sections' determinations denying funding to our grant proposal.